What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Time to talk about the largest company in the stock market, and that is Apple, ticker symbol AAPL. If you don't own this stock individually, you probably have exposure to it unless you're just net short the entire stock market. So this is a very important stock, and I think it's very important every quarter to analyze this company, and that is why I come here every 3 months to help you go through the numbers of Apple, help you understand these numbers better so you can make better investment decisions. And when we're talking about probably the most important company in the stock market in terms of its weighting and size at nearly a $2.5 trillion market cap, I can't think of a better company to try to understand. And what we will also do, other than go through the Q30 numbers, is we'll look at this company from a technical perspective as well. Every Friday on this channel, right around 2 p.m., 3 p.m. Pacific time, I post a video where I recap all the major FANG stocks, including Apple. We run down all the news of the week, which these companies tend to make lots of news. But also what we do is we look at the company from a technical perspective as well. And these lines I did not draw in before today's video. These have been in place for months since this is a company we regularly analyze here on the channel. In fact, every Friday. So we'll talk about from a technical perspective. The stock is sliding a little bit in after hours. Are we hitting levels of support? Is this uptrend broken? Have we made a little bit of a double top pattern up here? We'll talk about that when we get over to the stock chart. Now, Apple came out with their earnings guides. Their EPS came in higher than expected at 29 cents per share. Although when we get over to the financials, we will see evidence of a massive buyback over at Apple. Just over the last 3 months, on a quarterly basis, we went from 17.25 million shares down to 16.6 million shares on this one. They are absolutely retiring shares very, very quickly over at Apple. They also beat on that revenue side. They break it out, iPad, Mac, iPhone, and I could go over it there, but I will do that here when we look at the numbers. We'll take a look at the iPhone, the iPad, the iMac, all the different products. And not only that, but from a geographical perspective as well. America, China, Japan, those types of things. We'll look at that on today's video. Let's not waste any more of your time. Jump into the video. Our 3 months ended here are in the two left-hand column. The far left-hand column is this year. This is where we'll focus a lot of the time over the last 3 months. These are our numbers. Now, this is a Q3, so we've got 9 months, so essentially 3 quarters. That's what we've got going on here, year-over-year basis. We've got our net sales here. We've got our product sales. This is your iPhone, your iPads, your hard goods over at Apple. Came in at 64 billion. That is with a B. Every time I refer to a number on Apple, it's going to be large, and I don't want you to be desensitized by it. A lot of videos, including myself, might brush over these numbers like they're nothing. This is absolutely amazing. Combine dozens and hundreds of companies, and they don't do this over the life of their entire company. Apple does this in 3 months, and we're talking about one product line doing $64 billion. The other segment of their business is the services. Think Apple Music, think iCloud, those types of things. The software side of Apple came in at $17.5 billion. Last quarter, we were sitting, or a year ago period, on a quarterly basis, we were sitting about $3.2 billion on that. And I'll talk about why investors are so excited about that segment of the business. On the cost side, so our products cost us about, we'll call that $41 billion to make $63 billion. So not necessarily a high margin business. Okay, they have to pay lots of people to put these phones together. There's a lot of little components that go into making the phones, those types of things. That makes the product sales always, I don't want to say a low margin business, but lower than when we take a look at these services margins. Take a look. We spent $5.3 billion to make this $17.5 billion. That means over $12 billion of our gross margin, which is right here, sitting at $35.2 billion in the quarter. $12 billion of that is actually the service revenue. This is why investors focus on this, because if this can continue to grow, we went from 13 to 17. If we can get this into the 20s and maybe even potentially the 30s, guess what's going to grow right along with it? This gross margin over at Apple. You see, for the 9 months, everything holding true as well. Went from 80 up to 117 billion. This is not 117 million. $117 billion of not revenue, We're talking about gross margin over at Apple. Now, they do have other operating expenses, okay? We do have R&D, we do have selling general administrative as well over at Apple, and we've seen those are ticking up a little bit on a year-over-year basis, but nothing out of the ordinary, okay? So our total operating expenses went from 9.6 up to 11.2 when you're growing your revenues by, what's that, over $20 billion? To grow your operating expenses by just $2 billion, even less than that, that is absolutely amazing. That gives us operating income, which is where I tend to focus here on the channel. You might look, if you're new to these types of numbers, they might kind of seem daunting and you're not really sure what to factor in, what is important and what is not. In my opinion, with most companies, your gross margin is very important. That is your revenues minus your cost of sales. So 81 billion minus this 46, that gives us 35 billion. $35 billion in a quarter, $117 billion over 9 months over at Apple. That leaves us lots and lots of money to reinvest in the business through R&D, to pay our employees, to acquire other companies, pay dividends, buy back shares, all those types of things. Now you've got your operating expenses. So you take your gross margin sitting at 35.2, you minus this 11.1, that gets us to operating income. This is the income for operating the business. Essentially, it's income before taxes, before interest, those types of things, sometimes referred to as EBITDA or EBITDA or however you want to say it. But I tend to just focus on operating income because this is the income coming from operating the business. Tax rates change, income taxes change, interest rates change. Operating the business is something that stays relatively static. And we see for Apple in a quarter, in 3 months, they made $24 billion. That is $24 billion worth of operating income. That is more than most companies do in a revenue side in a lifetime, let alone in a quarter. We were sitting at about $13 billion in the previous year, and I thought that was amazing. Now, for the 9 months, we're sitting at about $85 billion. $85 billion in operating income over the last year. We'll talk about the share buybacks here in a second. The other thing that I want to talk about is the net sales by reportable segment. So we see America, that is still growing nicely. We see Europe, that is growing nicely. Greater China as well. There's lots of tensions with China in the marketplace. You hope that if you're an Apple shareholder, you hope that doesn't impact the stock. It doesn't seem like, at least over the last quarter, that is something that has impacted the stock as well. Japan is up, rest of the world across the board. We are up on Apple. Now we see net sales by category. Again, I talked about how Apple really hasn't, they released some new iMacs, but it's not really for a professional level like I have to use. They released, I believe, maybe a new iPad. I know they have not released a new phone over the last quarter. I don't think we've seen a lot out of the wearable segment as well, or even the services, but take a look. We're up across the board. And remember this time last year, so June, July last year, people were faced with, I'm going to do school at home for the next year. I'm working from home over the next year. So people were buying new computers. People were buying new iPads and different headphones and microphones and those types of things. So to beat those comps year over year without any significant, release of new products or improvements on those products, is absolutely amazing, in my opinion. Now let's come down to the balance sheet. Speaking of amazing, over at Apple, we've got our cash and cash equivalents here. We've got marketable securities as well. So we've got $34 billion in cash. This goes back to September, so this looks like to me like a 9-month view. You've got $34 billion in cash, another $27 in marketable securities. In terms of current assets on the cash side, you got over $60 billion. Now what they have down here, for some reason, I'm not exact. There must be some kind of accounting reason why they do this, but they put non-current marketable securities down here. This is probably like bonds and those types of things that have maturities extended over 12 months. You see that's sitting at $132 billion. So when you go on and get a clear picture of how much cash Apple has, we've got $132 billion, another 27 here and another 34, 50, 60. You got nearly $200 billion worth of cash on this company's balance sheet. You got receivables here sitting at $17 billion. You got some inventory as well. Look how low inventory. Okay, look at this. This is just incredible. So total net sales for the quarter were $81 billion. Total net sales for the last 9 months was $282.5 billion, not million, $1 billion. And in inventory, what you have sitting around is $5.178 billion. It's just unbelievable. They do just an absolutely phenomenal job. And I think this was Tim Cook's job, was like supply chain and that type of thing. And I don't know if it's his impact on that, but I just cannot believe you can have that many sales and have that little inventory sitting around. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Now, from the liability side, look, they have some term debt here. It's sitting at $105 billion, and they've got some term debt up here at a current sitting at about $8 billion. All things being considered, you got a fair amount of long-term debt on this company's balance sheet, but the interest rates and the ease that Apple is able to borrow money, please believe me, any interest rate that Apple is borrowing at, if you want to lend me that money, I don't care how much it is, I will take it because it's basically free money. And again, we have 200 some odd billion dollars worth of cash on this company. And so 100 and change in debt is really nothing, really, honestly. It's hard to say that, but it's really a fact. Now, we come down here to the 9 months on our cash flows. We pull down a net income number of $74 billion. I just can't believe that. $74 billion worth of net income. This factors in everything, every cost you possibly could have over at Apple, including taxes, interest, everything. $74 billion worth of net income over 9 months. That's basically like, what, $25 billion a quarter you're earning on the net income side. Now, cash flows allow you to add back depreciation, add back things like stock-based compensation, other receivables as well. That gets us to $83 billion, nearly $84 billion generated by operating the business. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Now, everything else looks well within line. We've got a repurchase of common stock. This is not common. Tell you what, $66.2 billion just over the last 9 months Apple has bought back. You see in the previous period, they bought back $55 billion. So combined, over $110 billion worth of Apple stock has been bought back by the company. So you can imagine why this stock, look, the numbers are great, but when the company is buying back $110 billion worth of it, it's, really hard for a stock like that to go down. So you combo some of the most amazing financials and amazing revenue and operating incomes that you'll ever see, including the balance sheet with just an amazing amount of cash, more cash than most governments have in the world, let alone companies. And you better believe you come over the stock chart and things are looking pretty good from a technical perspective. Now, we talked about this on our Friday show for a long time, for months and months and months. Talked about how this stock was channeling between $119 and $138. And we were looking for a break above 138 and really a break above 145. And that's exactly what we did over the last few weeks over at Apple. We have broken above these all-time highs here, and we've climbed above 145. Now, ironically enough, and I don't think it's ironic, it's a very well, traded company. All the information, everybody's looking at the same chart on Apple. Everybody's looking at the exact same technicals and those types of things. This stock is sitting right on a level of support right here at 145. It matches up with the trend line that we have drawn in and also overhead resistance here at 145. So this 145 level where Apple is resting right now is a natural level where the stock will want to hang. Now, if we break 145, we could come back to our previous area of hard resistance. And I'm going to slide this down just a little bit, but that's probably at the 137-ish range, okay? Give or take $1 or $2. Wouldn't surprise me if we break 145 on Apple that there's not a lot of bubbles here, okay? Bubbles, I really mean candlesticks. When you look at these candlesticks, these are people, okay? These are people buying and selling the stock. You could also match these candlesticks up with the volume down here as well. But when you break this level, there's not a lot of candles here, okay? When we're talking about going from 137 down to 120, look at all the candlesticks or people that are holding the stock down in this range. So a move from 137 down to 120 would be very significant. And obviously the rest of the market would be selling off right with Apple unless it had some kind of individual problem, which nobody is foreseeing. So to go from 145 down to 137, I don't think it's a big deal. Okay. Yeah, you will have broken a shorter term trend, but what I can anticipate at some point with the FANG stocks, they've all been going up. Okay. They are going to pull back at some point. And this one's probably, in my opinion, has a probability of coming back here to 137, getting another bounce and probably probably retesting these highs again back up here at 150 and then bouncing back down. Why do I assume that it would do that? Well, look, it just did that for like almost a year on the stock chart, and things were going pretty good at Apple. This is what happens with these major tech stocks, okay? They tend to go on monster moves and then trade sideways, okay? Monster move, kind of sideways chop, although we had March as well. This thing wants to go on a monster leg up and then chop sideways, at least for a small period of time. Those sideways chops are where you can accumulate shares of Apple. Look, if you want to go short Apple, you know, you got balls of titanium because they are executing such a massive buyback. They have such a massive dominant position financially from a balance sheet perspective, from a revenue perspective, from a profit perspective. I think there's millions of other stock, not literally, but there are likely hundreds of other stocks with far less greater advantages than Apple that I'd like to short. But in the intermediate term, wouldn't surprise me if we pull down to 137. I wouldn't short it to that level. I think that would take a tremendous amount of balls. But we come down here to 137. We play the bounce potentially back up here. This is not an area where I also would go all in with Apple, where I'd unload, you know, a large percentage of my IRA cash, those types of things. But you get a pullback below 137 and for some reason, and you get back into these areas between 120 and 130. That could be an area where I definitely would be more aggressive buying Apple shares. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Consider liking the channel, especially if you like Apple. Like I said, every Friday we cover this along with the major FANG stocks. We go over the news and recap the stock chart every Friday with Apple, and we'll certainly talk about them more in a couple days. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. We'll be back again soon with more. Good luck with your investments.